So welcome everyone to the first Santé Champagne Chat of 2020. And as I'd like to always do with the Champagne Chats is to arrive, because I know some of you are on the road, some of you have been dealing with difficult clients like the HMRC, and let's arrive. A bit like champagne has to rest in order for it to be effervescent. So I invite you to, if you're able to, if you're driving, please don't close your eyes. But Philip and Arabella and myself, I'll set my timer. And if you'd like to soften your gaze or close your eyes and just bring your awareness to your breath, that'll be perfect. And the timer will go off after a minute, starting now. There we are. That was a minute. I'm curious if, and you could perhaps just ask yourself this, if you found the minute long or short, because often I know that when I've drunk too much coffee, I can have a sense of, is this minute, it's like it can't go fast enough, for instance. Thank you for arriving. Thank you for arriving. And on the note of celebrating, because champagne is certainly iconic as a symbol of celebration, I've got two things that I'd like to share, but I don't want to be the first just because I'm hosting this event to share. I'd like to extend the invitation if there's anything that anybody is celebrating, either this week or we're still in January and it's the start of a new year. Perhaps there's something that you'd like to celebrate around the start of 2020. Has anybody got anything that like to share?
I have.
Yeah?
I'd like to celebrate. I've had a very challenging week. A new relationship with a new client, and we had a very difficult conversation earlier in the week, which went really badly. We kind of missed each other. We were both reactive to each other, and there's kind of a lot of money and work resting on this relationship. So it was very difficult, very challenging, and I wasn't quite sure if it was rescuable, and if it was, how could that happen? So I reflected as best I could on my part in it, and I reached out and offered the client a call to see if we could just hear each other. And what I want to celebrate is we had that call today, and we really did hear each other, and as a result, I feel trusting again. I think there's still work to do, but we're over the hump, and it feels wonderful. And it was just a reminder of how us human beings can get ourselves in a knot without really listening to each other, really hearing what is going on in the other person's world. So I want to celebrate listening.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, so would you like to celebrate listening?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if am I the only one with a glass of bubbly? I will santé to that. Arabella, I think you have lovely. Thank you, Philip, for sharing that.
I will metaphor. Yeah.
I'd like to celebrate that I've had the opportunity to present Santé as a leadership workshop, and I've got some lovely feedback from that. And a piece of feedback that I got from a CEO that it was in one of my sessions in December said to me that out of the whole morning, the 3.5-hour workshop, the one thing that really struck him was my question around, are you curious enough? So curiosity is one of the key pillars of the Santé program that I've put together. And I guess that comes from when I was a child. I used to always ask why. So if somebody would tell me, well, the sky is blue, and I said, well, why is it blue? And I guess that's how I always kept a bit of a learning, curious mindset. And I do feel that curiosity is important. It's certainly important to our well-being, because it helps us keep our options open. It helps us stay open to ideas. It helps us keep inclusive, even if people are different to us. We can always still ask why. So, and he said that he realized that he had not been curious for years. And his take on how to bring back curiosity was twofold, was to try and read more books. And when he sent me the message, he said he was onto his 3rd book in December. And the other thing was he's going to go to one cultural event, like a live show with his wife every month for 2020. So that I thought, well, that's I could potentially do that. So curiosity has come back to me by doing these workshops as really important. And I realized I always start off with celebration when I'm talking about Santé and these champagne chats, but you can't celebrate really until you're curious about something. So I'd like to bring curiosity in first. And for the time that we have, the next 20 minutes or so, I'm curious about 2 questions that you may reflect on and answer, either to yourself, or if you're comfortable to share, I'd love to hear that. And the first one is around being aware or having an idea of where you want to be in terms of your well-being. Because when we have a vision of where it is that we want to be, that creates a strong purpose and gives us a why. And once we have a strong enough reason why, it's generally easier to find out, how am I going to get there? And in my journey of trying to understand more about the champagne making process, and some of you know that I enjoy particular champagnes over others, and in keeping a champagne like Lançon Rosé or Veuve Clicquot, always a Clicquot or a Lançon, there's a particular recipe that they have to do, and the blending and the tasting of that is key. And from what I've understood, the winemakers that make champagne taste the wines hundreds of times because they're blending many different wines. And so tasting and asking themselves, does this taste like the wine, the signature wine I want to create, is key. So if you want to create a certain signature way of being, Arabella, you want to show up in a certain way, Ash, Philip, I know Celynn wants to be a certain way. It's good to check in with yourself. So to taste yourself, so to speak, perhaps not hundreds of times, but a couple of times, maybe more frequently. And one tool and technique that I use, that I got from a course that I did the year before last, was asking yourself 2 questions. The first question is, how am I? So in this moment, if you ask yourself, if you're curious, how am I? How would you answer that? In this moment, I'm much less nervous than I have been on other Zoom calls because I'm just accepting that I'm showing up as me, and me is good enough. I'm conscious that I'm warm, that I'm not hungry, and that I'm calm. Would anybody like to share in 1 or 2 words how you are in this moment? Or take a moment just to reflect for yourself.
Relaxed, relieved, and a warm feeling of the weekend is close.
Thank you, Philip. So then the question is, how would you like to be? That's the paired question that I ask with, how am I and how would I like to be? Because perhaps you don't want to be any different. I mean, Philip, perhaps, are you happy being relieved and relaxed with the sense of the weekend coming in?
Yeah.
Great.
I wasn't earlier before I had the call with my client, but I'm very happy to be what I'm feeling now.
Yeah, because it's only once we're aware of how we are that we can potentially then make a choice to be a different way. So curiosity can really help us along the way. And moment by moment, those are 2 questions that I ask myself several times. How am I? And how do I want to be? And then I can potentially choose to be a different way. Then in terms of a bigger picture thinking, around creating a vision and a reason why we should think about our well-being and how we want to be. I'd like to ask you to reflect on if we were meeting in an elevator and I turned to you and you had maybe 30 seconds between ground floor and the next floor to tell me what are the things that are most important to you? What kind of things would come to mind? So what's valuable and important to you? You don't need to say them out loud, but it's good just to think through them. There's no right or wrong. I mean, I'm thinking I'm going to go to salsa dancing this evening. So salsa dancing has come up as important for me. My health, getting good sleep, my friendships, my business. So once you have 3 things, that's cool. Then the next question I'm curious to ask you is, of those things that are important or valuable to you, is there one that is worth being well for? Of all the things that you just thought about that are important or valuable to you, is there one that is worth being well for? Those of you that have your cameras on, I can see you nodding. So there's a sense of perhaps, okay, yeah, my well-being is important. So then I'm curious to know, what does well-being look like to you? Because it looks like very different things. I mean, the more I do this work, the more I realize how different well-being and what it means to different people. So if we think of physical well-being, for me, that is about how you feed yourself, how you sleep, how you perhaps choose to move your body and exercise. Then there's emotional well-being, which is around how we self-regulate, how we express our emotions, also how we potentially relate to those around us, be it personally or professionally. Then there's also mental or intellectual well-being, which is how we manage our thoughts, how we keep a learning mindset, how we think, how we manage brain fitness, if I use that consumer term. And then there's also meaning dimension, which some people refer to as spiritual well-being. So out of those dimensions, physical well-being, emotional well-being, mental well-being, perhaps bigger picture meaning, which could be, contributing to a bigger picture. It could be a sense of belonging, what's really important for you. This is the question I'm going to pose. And I'm going to ask the question, and then I'm going to time my phone again for 1 minute. So I'd like you to, in that minute, reflect on the question. And whatever comes up for you is what comes up in the moment. It's a bit like I'm watching the bubbles in the champagne glass go up. They're quite beautiful. So no one bubble is better than the other, and there's no race and there's no winner. In fact, you need the first bubble to go up to pull the others. There's quite a lot in terms of the chemistry of bubbleology. There are actually people that, I can't remember what the name is, that study bubbles in beverages. Oh, Shelley has just popped online. That means that we have a South African joining us. So I'm going to ask you the question. I'm then going to time 1 minute. And then if you're comfortable sharing what has come up for you, you're welcome to. So the question is, if anything were possible, what would your well-being look like? And perhaps reflect on physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So the question is, if anything were possible, what would your well-being look like? So that was 1 minute, and For those of you that were on at the start of the call, perhaps it may be useful to reflect on how the second mindful minute felt for you compared to the first. That could be an interesting, curious question to ask. But before you answer that question, the first question, if anything were possible, what would your well-being look like? Is anybody happy to share something that has come up around the response to that?
I think for me, well-being centers around being completely stress-free as often as possible.
Wow, completely stress-free as often as possible. That's lovely. Thank you, Ash. I think that is possible, actually. Perhaps not, not for me. I'm just thinking, is there an example? So when something seems impossible, it's good to think of an example of where that thing is possible. So does anybody know of anybody on this planet that is completely stress-free all of the time?
Nope. I
Nope.
don't.
Okay, I'm having visions of Tibetan monks that live in the mountains.
It's cold sometimes. That's stressful.
Okay.
It would be for me. I hate the cold.
I'm not sure they don't feel stress. I think they just learn to accept it rather than fight it. So my answer to your question actually is similar to Ash's, I guess, in essence. I suppose my 100% with well-being is to be aligned. You know, when my life is aligned, when my emotions and my thoughts and my actions and everything is aligned, then and I've experienced bursts of it in my life, then my life flows and everything seems to be magically connected and organically happening. And times when I don't trust that and I step in and try and make it happen, then it usually becomes stressful. So alignment and flow is what came up for me.
So then, do you know when you're not aligned? Because that's a question that came to my mind when you mentioned.
Yeah, for me, it's when I'm not flowing, and so when everything feels effortful, when everything feels like it's difficult, when I realise I'm probably trying too hard, when I'm in the way. I think a lot of it's to do with telling the truth of whatever's going on in your life and getting out of the way. There's part of my own survival brain that tries to manipulate things into working rather than just trusting sometimes and actually getting myself or my head out of the way.
Yeah, and there's I'm seeing a lot more conversation around balancing the yin, the yang, the masculine, the feminine, which is the idea of, striving and working hard, but then also exactly what you just said is work and then stop and let, without going too woo-woo or ethereal, let the universe or let collective intelligence or let others actually come and help us achieve that. Yeah.
Actually, I just got a metaphor then with champagne, and no good champagne producer would mess with the process whilst every stage of the process is happening. Each process has a time to it, and over centuries, they know that they must allow that stage to have its time. If they kept taking the top off and sniffing and looking at it just to make sure it's all right, which is often what I find myself doing in my own life, it kind of messes up the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a certain kind of magic that happens, and in trusting that the elements of nature, the elements of just being will come together. Yeah. Thank you. And Shelley has said that for her, it would be waking up naturally and energized, the ability to focus, having mood stability, and good sleep. Wow, I think if we all had that, Shirley, that would be utopia, nirvana. Yeah, and I think the one definitely there is linked to the other. So having good sleep is what facilitates waking up naturally and energized. My best moments, best days are when I wake up like 5 minutes before my alarm, feeling like I actually pick up my phone to check the time, and it's just before my alarm's going to go off. And I'm like, it's really going to be a good day. And then another share around what well-being could look like is taking time to be in nature, yeah, and enjoying more of natural environments, regular relaxation that soothes the mind and creates more work-life balance. Thank you for sharing that, Clinton. So I'm interested. Is there anybody on this call who feels that they could spend more time in nature, or do you get enough time in nature?
Not sure I ever get enough time in nature, even though I do spend consciously chunks of my week in nature. I could always do with more.
And then perhaps in the interest of staying curious and asking why or how is, if you can't get out into nature more, how could you bring in perhaps nature to you? And I'm saying that because I've been visually cued by this. I've added another plant into my space. So I generally don't have a lot of plants around me, but I've realized how good they make me feel. It feels like nature's coming into my space. So that's something that I've done. I also have started to, very recently this week, playing background music while I work that is not music, it's nature sounds. So I happen to use Spotify. So if you have access to Spotify, they've got some beautiful playlists of wind and river, rain, storms. It's by no means a replacement for the real thing, but it can help on those days and weeks where perhaps you can't get out into nature itself. Yeah. Anybody else want to share anything before I move us on? On the note of rest, especially that's come up in the comments, what I found intriguing around the champagne making process is how regulated it is, and the least amount of time that a champagne needs to rest for a non-vintage one is 15 months. So when they make champagne, they add a bit of yeast and a little bit of liqueur into the bottle, and then they leave it. And they trust, to your point, Philip, they trust that the elements will work together. They don't mess with that. But you wouldn't be able to have a bubbly, sparkling, effervescent beverage without the rest. So if you're not able to get better sleep, and perhaps sleep could be a topic that we could just spend time on one of the champagne chats on its own, is to think of how you could bring more ease and potentially help Ash with bringing in or reducing stress, is to ask yourself, not just how am I in this moment and how would I like to be, but how can I create more ease? So right now, as you sit, I know that some of you might be driving. How could you create more ease in this moment? As I asked that question, I found myself taking a deeper inhale. Did anybody perhaps change their breathing? Mm-hmm. I generally carry tension. So, Philip, I know that I'm not aligned when I'm clenching my jaw and I'm tight in my shoulders. So how I could create more ease in this moment is through my body, is physically slowing down my breath and allowing my tongue to relax in the bottom of my mouth and dropping my shoulders. If you're perhaps still at the office, as I know some of you might be, a way to create ease could be perhaps to accept that you've done what you can for the week, and that it is, well, here it's almost 5:30 in the UK. In South Africa, it's going to be 7:30. There's somebody on the call who I think is in Amsterdam, so that'll be 6:30, and it's the end of Friday, so allow yourself to accept that what you've done is what you've done. So that's what I wanted to share on this Santé call, was how, for me, celebration is important, but to stay celebratory does require a certain amount of curiosity. And when we keep asking the question why, or how we can potentially create more ease, or how am I in this moment, and how would I like to be, it just opens up so many more options for us. So before I ask if there's anything else that you're going to be looking forward to celebrating, would anybody like, well, actually, I'll ask that question. When we meet again, so in 2 weeks' time, will be Valentine's Day, by the way, for those of you that celebrate Valentines. It'll be the 14th of February. Is there something between now and then that you would like to be able to celebrate? You don't need to voice out loud what that is. But when we set intentions or give awareness and channel some curiosity and intentionality and awareness to things, we can potentially make it easier for that particular event to manifest. So is there anything that you would like to celebrate if you are on this call again in 2 weeks' time? I'm giving that some thought myself too. Okay. There's one more comment just before I wrap up from Shelley saying there's an African proverb that says, a woman can't give birth to a baby in a month, meaning we cannot cut the creation process short. How true that is. 9. I see. I might have read that wrong.
Nine women couldn't give birth to a baby in a month. It's a 9-month process. You can't cut it short by enlisting 9 women for 1 month.
Lovely.
That's lovely.
Very nice.
Yeah, and how lovely.
You can't cut the creation process short.
Yeah.
You can't repackage in 9 months, whatever that is for you.
And you know what that makes me feel as you say that is a sense of, oh, I don't need to do everything all at once and create everything. No. Yeah.
No, the opposite. I need to do a bit less and just let the creation unfold healthily.
It reminds me of a phrase which I can't remember where it came from, but it stuck with me for years. Tell the truth, follow the process, and get out of the way.
That's good advice.
Well, I love that. And also, I've just looked over onto Facebook, and there's been a comment there around Michelle would like to celebrate the news that her husband has a job.
Oh, great news, Michelle. We're celebrating with you and your husband. Fantastic news.
We are indeed. And I'd like to celebrate all of you, because for you to be here, thank you so much for the support. I have big aspirations for what Santé can mean. I know that some of you, especially, for instance, Arabella, who's helped me with designing the content, you understand how curiosity ties into celebration. And collectively, we're creating a community, which is also a key pillar of Santé. And it honors my heritage with my parents coming from the Champagne region. And I'd like to celebrate and Santé all of you for making your well-being important enough to show up here to spend a bit of time thinking about. And as we end off, because I'd like to end off on time, is to not forget that question, because I asked you a few questions in the past half hour, but the one about if anything were possible, what could your well-being look like? So that come January 2021, potentially, we have moved forward in small steps, to Shelley's point, but created a better sense of well-being for ourselves, whatever that may mean for us. So thank you to all of you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Santé.
Santé.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.